Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I've got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about what I learned while I was working at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. We'll also talk about one of my favorite stories about a grandparent. Then I'm going to talk about what TV world I'd like to live in if I could, and follow that up with a top 5 list of my favorite sitcoms. So, yeah, it's going to be a great show. Tomorrow we'll do something a little lighter for the younger audience, for the kiddos out there, or for the kids in all of us. So tomorrow should be fun. We'll have a little talk about my favorite toys when I was a kid, and maybe talk a little bit about my time living in Egypt and Indonesia. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Today's show is brought to you by UNICEF. Right, this organization does a lot of good work fighting the pandemic and other diseases. Pop on over there and donate if you can. UNICEF. Really good organization, great charity. All right, should we start the show? Let's start the show. All right, so our first question today comes from an ex-coworker of mine, a phenomenal nurse, Lori. She wanted to know what are 3 things that I learned while working at Massachusetts General Hospital. Just a quick summary here. I worked at MGH for 7 years on a vascular surgery unit. I was part of the support staff. I worked at the front desk, answered phones, managed charts, just basically helped people out with whatever they needed help with. It was a great time, and I like to think that I did whatever I could while I was there to help out the nurses and the doctors, the housekeeping staff, and the aides, and whoever else came across my path. I also like to think that I brought a level of tranquility to the unit while I was there. I think that's kind of important. So yeah, Lori, 3 things I learned. First off, I learned that the Patriots and their fans are not all that bad. Now this has a lot to do with the people that I worked with, particularly the nursing staff. Everybody there was pretty much a Patriots fan. Before moving up to Boston, I was really not in that camp. Like most people in this country, the team that's on top you tend to hate. And I had some animosity towards the Pats. But over the course of a few years, I came around. When you stand outside of a hospital room door and watch a couple series of a football game with a sick patient, it really changes the way you perceive sports, how we enjoy sports, and what it means to be a sports fan. If you really understand how much this stuff means to certain people, you can really put all that fickle, silly hatred behind you and just enjoy the good things in life. And the second thing that I learned while working at MGH was how to love the city of Boston. The city is a tough nut to crack. It really takes some time to really appreciate what makes Boston so amazing. And I would say the number one factor in giving me the love that I have for the city of Boston is that I worked with so many locals at Mass General Hospital. The nurses, the support staff, so many of my coworkers were locals from the North Shore, South Shore, Winthrop, East Boston, Southie, you name it. Even nurses from New Hampshire and that whole Boston metropolitan area. One of the great joys in my life was getting to know these people. People like you, Lori, and Trish, and Ellen, and Coco, Gertrude, Johannes. Could go on and on and on with these names. But these individuals and their personalities, all of those interactions and that experience really changed my life. So thank you guys so much for that. Love you and miss you and hope you're doing really well. Stay safe. We're all thinking about you guys. And the last thing I would say, the third thing on this list, but probably the most important, is that I learned empathy while working at Massachusetts General Hospital. This is something we all struggle with, I think, is to put yourself in other people's shoes, to really understand them, so that you can be compassionate and effectively care for people, but also so that you can effectively work with other people. Just watching the registered nurses and the aides and the doctors do what they do day in and day out in a large hospital really puts things into perspective. And I consistently noticed how important it was to reach out, to get to know people, to understand them in order to actually care for them effectively. Now, this also applies to just working with other people. Boston's a very diverse city, with a large immigrant population. Massachusetts General Hospital is a kind of a microcosm of this. And, you had to deal with a lot of different personalities, a lot of different cultures. So I always tried to connect with people and understand them, just so that working relationship was effective, was efficient, and there was as little drama as possible when I was working there. So yeah, empathy for me is probably the big thing here. So thanks a lot, Lori, for the question. That was really thoughtful. I appreciate you reaching out, and I hope you and your family are doing well. So our next question today comes from my sister Jamie. She wanted to know about a favorite story of mine about a grandparent. I was kind of racking my brain trying to think of stories of my grandparents. There really aren't a lot that I could think of, so I'm sure I'm going to miss something here. But in recent months, I've been going back and learning as much as I can about my grandfather, James Leo Smith's time serving in the Navy during World War II. So here's one story that's just incredible in my opinion. He was in the Navy. He served on an LST, which is a landing ship tank, basically a mid-sized transport vessel that carried troops and tanks and large equipment and things like that. So my grandfather, he set sail from the east coast of the United States and headed across the Atlantic in a large convoy. This was shortly after the D-Day invasion. So their job was going to be to replenish equipment and troops and things like that, crossing back and forth across the English Channel. But once the convoy reached England and started heading south towards the English Channel, a German U-boat torpedoed my grandfather's ship's sister ship. So my grandfather's ship was called LST 920. The boat that was torpedoed was LST 921. The captain of my grandfather's ship disobeyed orders and turned around and went back to rescue some of these guys on their sister ship. So they were able to rescue quite a few of them. But just it's a really harrowing, amazing story there. My grandfather stayed on the LST 920 for the entirety of World War II, or his service during World War II at least. So after they served in Europe, they went over to the Pacific, and he actually took part in the Battle of Okinawa as well. So I think that's probably my favorite story right now. Just learning that new stuff and really getting into the details of what these men and women did during World War II. It's amazing to think what these people did, and to know that a family member was such a part of something like that. Just incredible. Thanks for the question, Jamie. And our last question today, before we get to my top 5 list of my favorite sitcoms, comes from Justin Burt. Another cool question. In response to my video yesterday, he wanted to know if there was one TV world that I would like to live in, which would it be? The first thing that came to my mind was Star Trek: The Next Generation. This was a favorite show of mine when I was younger. The universe created by Gene Roddenberry really hits home with me. It would just be amazing to travel through space, to interact with new cultures, new species, to explore new planets. One thing that I really love about the Star Trek: The Next Generation world is just the complete lack of cynicism. It just seems like a really cool place to be. So that for me tops the list there. Justin, thank you so much for the question. So without further ado, we'll do today's top 5 list. Today we've got Adam's top 5 favorite sitcoms. Now understand, I didn't really start watching sitcoms until the early 1990s. So my heart really belongs to shows that were on from the 1990s until today. At number 5, we have It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. This is a contemporary program. It's been on FX, and I believe now it's on FXX. It's been on for a long time, kind of under the radar, but has gathered a very large cult following over the years. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is created by Rob McElhenney and Glenn Howerton. And every episode we get to watch this gang, Dennis, Mac, Charlie, Dee, and Frank, just get into all kinds of trouble. This show would probably be further up on my list if it weren't for the fact that it was so cynical. That being said, it's this cynicism that really makes the show what it is. They do a lot of crazy things. We've seen blackface in this show. We've seen them really push the envelope as far as what should actually be shown on cable television. But yeah, number 5 there. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And at number 4, I'm going to go with The Simpsons. This show's been on the air since 1989, and it's still going strong. It's a great show if you want to watch something that looks at what's going on in the world today from a different lens. Another great thing about this show is that it's produced so much great comedic talent. Generally, people who write for The Simpsons go on to do great things. Conan O'Brien is one example of this. He wrote for The Simpsons for a couple seasons. The fact that it's animated allows the creators of this show to do a lot of things that you can't do on other shows. The voice acting on The Simpsons is also something that needs to be noted. Some of the best voice work probably ever. And at number 3 here, I'm going to go with The Office. So I'm going with the American version of The Office here. You can combo this with the British Office. This show features one of the all-time great TV romances with Pam and Jim. It's also the show that ushered in this era of single-cam sitcoms, where you don't necessarily have a live studio audience, and it's shot more like a regular television show or a film. In The Office, they use a mockumentary or fake documentary style. That was pioneered by Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant in their British version of The Office. It gives you those little moments of voyeurism that I think are really important and make certain scenes a little more funny. So yeah, The Office, number 3. And we're going to push a little further back here in time with my choice at number 2. Number 2, we have Cheers. Yes, this is a great long-running sitcom. Ran through the 80s into the early 90s. There was a spin-off of Cheers called Frasier. That was a very good sitcom as well, perhaps deserving of an honorable mention here. But yeah, Cheers was great. It's still to this day, it's comforting to hang out in that bar where everybody knows your name and just hang out with those characters, Cliff and Norm and Woody. I think Ted Danson's role was phenomenal. One of the great straight men in television history. And I think Cheers really demonstrates how important a great cast of actors and how important great writing really is. If you're going to spend 90% of your program inside a bar on the same set, it's really difficult to keep it fresh and to keep it funny. So you've got to give them credit for that. So number 2, Cheers. And at number 1, this likely won't come as a surprise to anyone out there. Number 1, I have Seinfeld. Yes, this is my favorite sitcom of all time. I watched it throughout high school religiously every week. Really shaped the way that I think about comedy. Seinfeld got me into stand-up comedy as well. I didn't really watch stand-up before then. But this is a good place to start. His character in the show, but also the little clips of his stand-up kind of piqued my interest. With Seinfeld, Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld really changed the way that we think about sitcoms. They would write these incredible episodes where a joke might start at the beginning of the episode, but by the end of the episode, they've come right back to it in a callback of sorts, like you might see in a stand-up special. But perhaps most importantly, the cast of Seinfeld is just incredible. I think Jason Alexander as George Costanza was really what held the whole show together. He is my favorite character on Seinfeld. Julia Louis-Dreyfus, always incredible. She's one of the great comedic actresses of all time at this point. So yeah, number 1 on my list, Seinfeld. All right, guys, that's it for today's show. I hope you're doing well. Again, we're going to have a little lighter episode tomorrow. This will probably end up being our Wednesday tradition. This will be for the kids or the kids inside our hearts. Talk about my favorite toys. Talk about growing up overseas, what it was like being a kid, living in some of these places. Yeah, it should be a fun program. So tune in. As usual, post your thoughts and your questions and your comments below so I can get to those eventually. But stay healthy out there, guys, and enjoy the day, and we will talk to you tomorrow. See you soon.